Hi, my name is Cole from FCP Euro, and today I'm going to show you how to install our comprehensive shifter upgrade kit for the Mk8 Golf. Let's get into it. In front of me, I have the comprehensive shifting kit that we've assembled here at FCP Euro. This kit includes the 034 solid shifter cable ends, APR's short throw shift kit, along with APR's solid metal shifter cable bracket. Whether you're looking to replace worn shifter bushings or upgrade the shifting assembly for a more direct feel, this shifter kit is for you. Now that we've gone over everything included in the kit, let's go over the tools that we're going to need to install this shifter. So we're going to need a variety of different depths and sides of sockets, including an 18 millimeter, a 17 millimeter, a 14 millimeter, a 13 millimeter, a 10 millimeter, a 7 millimeter, and a 3 millimeter Allen. We're going to need a 13 millimeter wrench, a variety of different extensions, a small stubby ratchet, some medium sized ratchets, a large 1/2 inch ratchet, torque wrenches. I have two different here for smaller torque values and larger torque values. So I have 1/4 inch and 3/8. We have a plastic trim tool, a pair of needle nose pliers, some hose clamp pliers or regular pliers to take off spring clamps, a magnet, a 90-degree pick, a trim tool, a flathead screwdriver, an electric ratchet that's optional, some synthetic grease, and optional glass cleaner. Now that we've gone over all of our tools, let's get our DIY started. Now, getting started, we're going to want to remove the intake assembly, and I like doing this by loosening the worm clamp on the back of the intake at the throttle inlet. This is going to be a 7 millimeter hex head on the top that we can use a socket and a wrench, or you can use a flathead if you do choose. Once this worm clamp is loose, I'm going to take this vacuum line off the intake assembly, come back here, pop this off the intake, pop this off from the body, which is held in with some rubber grommets. And it takes a little bit of oomph. Just be very careful when doing this. We don't want to damage it. And then there is going to be a plastic line for the diverter valve that goes to the plastic intake pipe. There's two clips, one here, one on the opposite side. Now, this connection can be a little bit tricky sometimes because it is in an area with a lot of heat. So I like to use some glass cleaner, saturate the area, and start to work that cleaner in to break things free so we can separate it. Now, if this is giving you some problems and you want a little bit more room, you can take some hose clamp pliers, pull this clamp back, leave it on the actual intake, pull this off, pull the air box out like so. Now that I have a little bit more room and I've sprayed my glass cleaner in here, I'm going to squeeze these tabs and slowly work that pipe off, set it to the side, and then put some blue towels in here to block that intake. Now that I have my intake out of the way, I'm going to start by removing the battery, and then we're going to be removing the battery tray. I'm using a 10 millimeter socket to loosen the battery clamps. You don't have to take the nuts off all the way. They can be left on the clamps. And then one trick that I like to do is take some electrical tape. And since this is a live circuit, once I take this off, I do not want this touching again. So I'll take some electrical tape and just wrap it around the end of this terminal. So in case it even slips or gets contact with that post there on the positive side, it is not going to spark, because I'm putting an insulator on my cable like so. There is a little clip here that we're going to push back the safety lock and release, so I have some more leash on this cable itself. Once I have that off, I'm going to take my 10 millimeter again and remove the strap on top. This completely comes off and you fish out this end of the bracket and put that to the side. Now with that removed, I'm going to take a long extension and a 13 millimeter socket with my ratchet. I might have to move this cable a little bit. There is a little bit of leash there, but this bolt right here holding the tie down, I'm going to remove. Be careful not to drop that. Set this aside and then slide the battery hold down bracket out of the vehicle. Now that my one battery terminal is off and the bracket is released, I can now take the second terminal off from the back, pop this handle up, and carefully remove the battery. Be careful on the positive lead because there is a terminal here that is still connected. You can remove that to give you a little bit more room and put it to the side, or you can leave it connected. So I'm going to take a 10mm socket and just remove that so we have a little bit more room. Be careful when you're using a ratchet on a battery that you're not going to touch any grounding areas because it will spark. Now this is a captive nut on this wiring harness, so that nut is going to stay with that. So I'm going to take these harnesses and kind of tuck them out of the way a little bit. This little wiring harness holder is being a little tricky, so I have a little trim tool piece here that I'm going to get underneath to try and work that out of the plastic, just like so. And you can see it's just going to be a friction fit on these little wiring harness holders. And once I have both those removed, I can take this harness and tuck it down and keep it out of the way. Now with all of that removed, I can now grab this part of the battery handle. Remember, this is going to be heavy, so try not to lift from your back and use your arms instead and pull that battery out. Now that my battery is out, I can start removing this battery tray. So we're going to be removing the 1, 2, 3, 4 10mm hardware to pull this tray out. 3 of these are going to be bolts, and this one in the back is going to be a nut. Once that bolt right there is removed, you can now remove this metal bracket separately from the plastic tray. Some of these bolts on the battery tray are a little recessed, so it's nice to have a magnet to be able to remove the bolt before you remove the tray and don't lose in the engine bay. Now, the final 10mm nut is on the back of the firewall, so it can be a little tricky to get. I always like to put a finger on top of it before I remove my ratchet, so I know where the nut is and I don't drop it in the back there. Now, once I have all the hardware removed, there is a little wiring harness clip for the ECU that I will take off of the plastic piece, tilt it up, over, and out. Now that I have my battery tray out of the way, I can move my harness over here to give me a little bit more working room to start to disassemble the shifter mechanism. So now that I have my battery tray out of the way, I'm going to start removing the shifter cable ends from the linkage itself. I'm going to start with the plastic one here, take a flathead screwdriver, get behind the linkage, and slowly pry towards myself. This can be a little bit tricky. Once I get the initial movement, I'm going to put my flathead screwdriver down, get behind it, and pull towards myself. Now, once that is off, I can move it to the side. Then I'm going to remove the second shifter cable end, and this is going to be a metal clip where we're going to pull up on the tab right here and slide it out. Sometimes it's useful to grab a little flathead screwdriver just to get underneath, and then we can slide it out just like so. Once that clips off, this end can come off. After removing both shifter cables, I'm going to take a 13mm socket, hold the shifter assembly from rotating, break that free, and remove that nut. Now that I have that nut off, I can remove this shifter assembly. It might take a little bit of rocking side to side like so. If this shift linkage is giving you a little bit of trouble, you can take some penetrating fluid, small amount, right on the top of the shaft here. Let that sit, and then you continue to work that free. Now I'm just wiggling this really slowly, just like so, working that free, and then sliding this big metal piece out. Now with that metal shifter assembly released, I can release this plastic clip here on both sides and then pull that straight up. With that plastic clip removed, I can rotate and pull this lever out. Now that we have our shifter assembly removed, I'm going to be removing the 3 fasteners for the shifter bracket. I'm going to be using a 13mm socket. There's going to be 2 bolts and 1 threaded nut on the side. So I'm going to start with the bolt in the back here. I like to use a small ratchet and socket to get that free, break it free. I use my fingers to loosen it most of the way just because it's kind of tight back here. Make sure that's completely loose. Awesome. Go to the next one. Broke that free. The torque spec isn't super high, so you won't need a lot of grunt to remove this. Once those are free, just remove them from the car altogether. And one more nut down here on the bottom, which is also going to be a 13mm. Can be a little tricky to get to. Sometimes it's easier using a different combination of sockets. It's a little blind as well, so I have to just look around the corner, break that free, and use my hands again. It's a little tight back there, so it might take a little bit to remove the nut from the side of the bracket. Now, once I have all of those 3 hardware bolts and nuts removed, I can slide this whole cable bracket off to the side. So of course, Volkswagen loves to surprise us, and we found on certain manual transmission Mk8 Golf R models and GTI models that one of the transmission bolts has a non-threaded stud on it instead of a threaded stud. If you see this non-threaded stud sticking out of your transmission, it won't work with the APR shifter cable bracket. So if your bell housing bolt looks like this, install the provided bolt included in our kit, torque it to 80 Newton meters, and now we can continue with our DIY. Now that we have the shifter cable bracket unbolted from the vehicle and put to the side, we're going to work on removing the shifter cable ends and the shifter cables out of the bracket. Now you can put these in backwards, so we want to make sure we're putting them in the same orientation as we remove them. And to do that, I like to take some blue painter's tape and right and left on the cable and the ends so we know in which direction they're going in. So how I label this, looking at the car face in from the engine bay, I'll take the right cable, write an R on my tape, and then wrap that around the end of the shifter cable. Now that I have the right side labeled, I like over labeling everything, so I'm just going to label the left side as well. Once I have the shifter cable ends labeled, I'm going to make identical labels to wrap around the shifter cables themselves behind the bracket. Now that we labeled the cable ends and the cables, we're going to be removing the cable ends from the cable so we can remove the bracket. To remove the shifter cable end from the cable, you'll have to push this back, turn it to the right about 25 degrees. Once that is locked into place, we can slide this cable end off completely. Now we're going to repeat the step for the left cable as well. Now that we remove the cable ends, I'm going to take a flathead screwdriver and pry up on this clip. Be very careful not to puncture the boot on the shifter cables. There's one, and I'm going to repeat that step on the left side. Again, get right underneath of it, kind of just walk that clip upwards. Be sure to not drop it. They have a little bit of a spring when you remove them. Now that the clips are removed, we can slide the shifter cable bracket right off the cables. Now that we have the stock shifter cable bracket removed, I can show you some key differences between the two. This plastic assembly and rubber bushings is going to create a smooth shifting experience inside the cabin. Now, the reason why we're upgrading to a metal bracket is because it's going to create a much more solid and positive reinforcement feeling. and it's going to allow us to have more of a direct shift. Now, as you can see side by side with these units, the upgraded version on my left is made completely out of metal. There is no rubber bushing or plastic housing to absorb those vibrations. So if you're really sensitive to vibrations inside your cabin, this might not be the shifter for you. However, if you're looking for the most direct feel and positive shift engagement, this shifter bracket assembly is awesome. Now, you'll have to pay attention on the orientation, just how we had it, pulling it apart. Since it's labeled, I know it's in the correct orientation, and I'm going to slide the cables through these holes and pull them towards me. Now that we have the shifter cables fed through the bracket, we're going to be putting the clips back on the shifter cables, and it's very important in which orientation the clip goes on. The tab must be facing the front of the car when installing it back into the cable. Now that I have the cable installed in the bracket, I'm going to take the clip, and there's a little groove right here, and you might have to hold it from the back, and you may need some brunt force to push that cable clip back in. And we want to make sure that it has all the way positive engagement and it is in that groove, because if it's not, it could pop out. So now I'm going to check to make sure that clip is in all the way and push on the cable so that it can't pop out and it feels nice and engaged there. So we're going to take the other clip that I have on the other side of the cable, push down and click it into place. Again, I'm checking to make sure that that cable will not pop out and the clip is firmly engaged. Now that we have our shifter cables installed into our new APR shifter bracket, we can start installing the bracket onto the stud in the transmission and then thread in the 2 bolts that hold that bracket down. Now that I have those bolts and that nut installed, I'm going to fasten these by hand. Now I have our 3/8 torque wrench set to 20 Newton meters. It is a very tight area, so you might have to get creative with extensions, mid-size sockets, or short sockets with extensions. I have a mid-length socket, 13 millimeter on here that I'm going to be torquing with. Now that I have these 2 bolts torqued, I'm going to use our torque wrench with a long 13 millimeter socket and extension on that last nut for that bracket. Perfect. Now that we're done under the hood, let's shift over to the bench and assemble the APR shift kit. Now we're going to be taking our stock cable ends and installing the 034 Motorsports solid shifter bushing. So we're going to take a pair of needle nose pliers and start to remove all the rubber inside of these. It's a little bit challenging and we may have to get a little bit aggressive to pull the rubber out. Sometimes it's good to push it in one direction. Be careful not to hurt yourself. So there's an inside piece just like this, and then there will be the rubber section that will, once the internal piece is out, it's going to come out a lot easier. So grabbing the rubber on the outside and the inside, firmly grasp it and start pulling that out just like so. Now that we have the rubber guts out of the stock shifter end, we're going to be installing these solid bushings. Now the one in my hand is going to be from the right side because we labeled it. So this one, we're going to be using the round version of the solid insert. And we're going to just take that, push in like so, hold this brass piece because we do not want it to fall out, and then install the other half of this on the back side. Now, this is currently not clipped together, so be careful to not lose all the pieces. Once I have all of these sandwiched together, I'm going to take our tape, put it back on the bottom so I know this is the right side, and then set it aside. Now, we're going to start working with our left side. Take the tape off that we placed on earlier, put to the side, and we're going to grab a flathead screwdriver, get right underneath here, and separate the 2 plastic halves. Now that we separated those 2 plastic halves, we're going to take our needle nose pliers that we had earlier and get in between the end casing of it and the rubber. Again, this will require some brute force here because there's a slight adhesive on it. It may come out in a couple pieces, and if it does, that's okay. Sometimes we have to take the end of that needle nose, almost use it like a knife get it in there, grab the other side, grasp firmly with our hand, and remove all the rest of the rubber. Now, once we have the rubber out of it, we can take the other half of our solid shifter bushing kit, take the brass and the piece that is labeled 30811 on the top, install it in one orientation. Now, this is going to be a tighter fit, so if it's not completely straight on, it may not go in quite as easily. Now my gloves are getting pinched a little bit here, and it's okay to grab my needle nose pliers and just give it a little assistance to get in there. It's a tight fit, be careful. So now that we have the one side of the shifter bushing installed, we're gonna rotate it over while having my finger on the back of it and install the other side. You also can remove that solid brass insert if you think it's gonna get in the way. Take the shifter bushing plate in this orientation and work it in like we did before. And it's a tight fit, but it does pop right in. Now, once I press that in like so and made sure that it's nice and snug, I can reinstall this brass insert to the side with the bevel. Now it's gonna be a little tight because it has to align with that bottom side of it, like so. Again, this solid centerpiece does not have a clip inside of this, so when you're transporting it, make sure you have your finger on the side where the thrust surface is so it doesn't fall off if you rotate it. Now that we're done installing all the solid shifter cable and bushings, we're going to take the tape that we had previously labeled, wrap it back around it, set it aside, and start getting into assembling the APR shifter. So the first thing we're going to pick up is going to be this bracket below, and we're going to want to take this stud that is provided in the kit that has a 17mm hex head on the back of it, flip over to the flat side, and then take that stud and thread it in by hand. Make sure that we're not cross-threading it because this is aluminum and this is going to be made out of stainless steel. Once I have that threaded all the way down like so, then I'm going to take my torque wrench, and it's going to have a 17mm socket on it, and it's going to be set to 28 Newton meters, and we're going to use that torque wrench to torque this bracket to our spec. Now, this is a little challenging while holding both. It may be helpful to put this at a bench vise of some sort, or you can put it down on the table like so. Perfect. All right, this is now torqued. We're going to take this ball nut, place it on top of it, place my finger on the back side, take the included 13mm lock nuts, thread it on by hand, grab a 13mm wrench, hold it from the back side, and then grab our torque wrench that can be set to 8 Newton meters with a 13mm socket, and continue to torque this part of the assembly. It's not a high torque spec, so no need to go crazy. Perfect. Once we have the ball nut and the shaft installed, we're going to be selecting the appropriate sized shaft for the shifter assembly. Now, there are multiple diameters that are included in the kit below. However, only one size will work with this application. So we're going to take the size that fits our round end right side shifter bushing, and I'm just going to verify that here and make sure it's a nice tight fit. Once I know that, I'm going to take this piece, put that stud on top there, grab that lock nut, thread it in by hand, like so. Now we can see that there's a channel here, and that channel is designed to hold that lock nut down. Once we have the nut on the back here and it's threaded in most of the way, we're going to have to set up our initial adjustment on this shifter assembly. Now, once this is loosely tightened, we're going to be able to adjust the position of this rod from the center point of this pole. If we position this rod further towards outside of the pole, it's going to have a longer throw, but it's going to be easier to get into gear. If we push it closer towards that pole, it's going to have a shorter throw. However, it might be a little bit more difficult to have that throw get into gear because we have less of a lever. So we're going to snug it down right in the middle position and then adjust from there once it's in the car. I'm going to be using that 13mm wrench and just get it so it won't move. Not torquing it, not too tight, just snug. Once that is all snugged up, we're gonna take this little plastic piece that's included in the kit, grab some synthetic grease. I like to use stuff that has MOS2 in it just because it's an anti-friction wear property and it is awesome. So we're gonna take a little bit of that grease. I'm gonna coat the end of the ball here. We don't want too much, just a light coating. Now that I have a little bit of grease on my finger, I'm gonna take that grease and push it in between these cracks here on the sliding assembly. This little plastic piece is gonna ride in here, so the extra grease I'm just gonna put all in this channel, lubricate it, and make it nice and solid. Now that we have this channel greased in this assembly, we're gonna take this plastic piece and clip it onto this ball just like so. It's gonna take a little bit of force and snap right in. And then once that is on that ball, I'm gonna take a little bit more of my grease and just lightly coat the outside. Now, once we have this channel greased and the plastic piece on the ball, we're gonna want to size the last stud in this kit. Now, just as a reminder, you will have a leftover stud because this kit is applied for multiple chassis. And in this video, we're sizing this for the specific end links that we have on our manual Golf R. So once I have sized this, we're gonna take that stud, install it into the channel, and place that lock nut on the back side of it. And then we're gonna grab my 13mm and just thread that down and snug it in the position that we want to start with. Just snug it, not too tight. Now that we've done that and we have a leftover stud here, just so I don't get confused, I'm gonna set this to the side because we will not need this piece in the kit. Now that we've loosely installed all the studs on our shifters, we're gonna want to install the provided weights that APR has given us. They've given us a quantity of 3 of the same identical weights to fine-tune the shifter feel. Now, the more weights you add to this, the easier that inertia is going to keep rolling through the gears. The less weight we have, the more agile that shift is gonna be. So more weights, easier to shift. Less weights, you have to put more momentum behind the shift lever to get into the gear that you want. Now in this case, I'm gonna be installing all 3 of these weights. So when we shift the lever, it's gonna have a nice momentum going into gear. One thing to note is that depending on the positions of the shifter cables, you may not be able to run all of the weights because the weights might hit the cable assemblies. So when installing this in your vehicle and after you've set the dimensions of where you want the shifter cable to be to fine tune your throw, be sure that the cables are not hitting these weights. If they're hitting the weights, you're gonna have to remove one of the weights to have a lower deck height so it clears the cables. I'm deciding to install all 3 of the weights on our shifter assembly. So I'm going to stack all these weights right on top. I'm gonna grab the longest out of the bolts, and these are gonna be an Allen head bolt, and I'm just gonna hand thread them in on both sides. Now that I have this hardware loosely installed, I'm gonna take my torque wrench with my 3mm Allen socket and torque this to 2 Newton meters. Perfect. Once we have all the weights torqued, I'm gonna take a little bit of grease, take these plastic inserts, and just do a light coating on the outside. Now that we have these plastic inserts greased, let's head back into the engine bay and finish this install. Now let's take our weighted shifter assembly and install it onto the shaft coming out of the transmission. You'll notice that this is keyed. That means it can only go on one way. So I'm going to lower down into the engine bay and find that keyed position where that slides down nicely. You can see I don't have to force this. I don't have to pound it down. If everything is as how it's supposed to go, it will just slide right down. Once I have that on, I'm gonna take my nut here, loosely install it on top, and then torque it to our specification. Now that we have the nut installed on top of the shift tower and loosely hand tight, I'm going to show you a little trick on how we can achieve the torque without damaging the transmission. I'm going to take the plastic piece that we initially removed from the transmission shifter, and I'm going to shove it in between the weighted assembly and the transmission mount. Now what that is going to do is it's going to allow, when we're torquing this, to not actually put the stress on the transmission shifting mechanism. Now that we have our torque wrench here and it's set to 23 Newton meters, we're going to put that 13 millimeter socket onto the nut, and we're going to torque this until we hit the targeted value. Perfect. Now that we have that nut torqued on the shaft, we can remove this plastic piece and move it to the center. We're going to take this bracket and we're going to take this bushing and a little bit of grease on the shaft. Just spread that around. Install this shifter bushing in this orientation. We can spread that grease a little bit around more. Now we're going to drop this down into the transmission at an angle. You might have to move the shifter assembly to get that angle right. It's a little tricky. And then once it's at the angle, we're going to shift it forward. We can move this shifter assembly back into the center, push it all the way, grab my other bushing. Then we will take the other shifter bushing on the table and slide it right in onto the opposite side. We might need to grab a screwdriver, flathead, and just evenly push that shifter bushing in all the way and make sure it is engaged like so. Once we have that bushing in, we'll take the clips provided in the kit and slide it into the groove on the shaft. Now that that is installed, we're going to want to verify that that clip is not going to come off. And now we can start putting our shift linkage ends on. We're going to take a little bit of grease and install it on both of these shafts. Now this is just because these are going to be a highly friction moving area. So a little bit of grease goes a long way when it comes to wear. We will take the shifter end that is labeled R, take the R labeled cable, then with the large brass piece facing towards the left, install this onto the shaft, grab one of the clips provided in the APR kit, and slide it into the groove and verify that that clip has a solid engagement. Once the right side end link is installed, we'll take the left side, remove the tape, take this spring, push it back, turn it to the right, make sure that the large brass area is facing up, and install the end on the cable and slide it onto the shaft. Once that end link is installed on the shaft, we'll take the provided clip, slide it into the groove, and wait for that click and positive engagement. Now you'll see that we're leaving both of the springs locked in the open position on the shifter assemblies, and that's because we're going to have to go inside the cabin and set our shifting neutral position for the alignment of the linkages. Now that the cable ends are installed and in the unlocked position, we're going to want to preload the shifter tower down a little bit, and this lever right here where my finger's pointing, we're going to want to push that in, and we're going to want that to be engaged all the way. And I'm just going to wiggle this while pushing that in to make sure that's in the locked position. Now with that shifter assembly all locked in, let's head inside the cabin. Now we're going to have to remove this shifter boot and slide it up, and there's two ways you can do that. You can feel around with your fingers and try to clip it out, or you can use a plastic pry tool and be very careful and get in between the plastic, and then you can kind of just reach in from the top, and once you have it free, you can work your way around and pull all of the clips out. Now, once all the clips are out, we're just going to slide this boot up and out of the way. Now that we have that hole in the boot, we can take the provided rod that comes with the APR shifter upgrade kit, and we're going to install it through this hole. We're going to hit one of the holes that is attached to the shifter, and then once you'll feel it kind of stop, we're going to take the shift lever and go back and then to the left a little bit, and then we're going to be able to push that rod all the way down. Now when that rod is all the way down in that specific channel, that is locking this shifter assembly in the shifter alignment position. Now let's move back to the engine bay and lock in those shifter ends. Now before locking these adjustments into place, I want to verify this pin is still pushed in and that is still locked. Once I verified that, we're going to quarter turn these assemblies so the spring pops, like so, quarter turn it like that. Now that both of these adjustments are locked, I can pull this shaft lever out, release it, go back into the cabin, and remove the pin. We can come back here with a set of needle nose pliers, grab that pin while wiggling this to remove it, just like so. Now at this point, we're going to lower our shifter boot and start feeling how our gears are engaging. This shifter assembly is very adjustable in all different positions, so we can choose how we want the shifter to feel. And wow, does that feel like a positive engaging shift. I feel like I want it a little bit tighter, so I'm going to go back into the engine bay and show you how to adjust the positions of the arms so we can fine-tune our shifting experience. Now that we want to adjust the throw, we're going to remove the clip on this shift linkage and then remove the clip on the other shift linkage. Once the clips are removed, we can slide the linkage off and set it to the side. Make sure none of these pieces fall out. Now with both end linkages removed, adjusting the position of this pin is going to change the side to side in the car, and then adjusting the position of this pin is going to change the forward and back position of the shifter inside the car. So I want to fine tune both of those real quick by taking my 13mm socket. And remember, we didn't fully tighten these because we kept them a little loose because we knew we might be able to adjust this a little finer. Once I have the estimated position I want, I'm going to snug it up again. So all of these adjustments that I'm making here are subjective to the driver's preferences and how they want their shift experience to be. I've just snugged these up again because I want to test this, so I'm going to throw this onto the rods like so and reinstall my clips. One very important note, this adjustment, you need to check all range of motion to make sure that the actual cable end is not hitting the weight when pushing it up or down. If it is hitting that weight, you either have to remove a weight or you're going to have to change the position of this linkage. So I'm cycling it through here and everything feels great. Now, if you make any adjustments in the positions of the shifter where they sit in this channel, you're going to have to do another alignment on the shifter cables, which we stated previously. And like I said, we're going to do a quick realignment here. And after I've released all of the mechanisms underneath the hood to lock that alignment in place, now we're just going to test how that feels. That is one nice shift. I feel really happy with that. So we're going to clip in all of the cover for the shift boot again. Make sure we hear that pop. Now that we have the adjustment just where we like it, we're going to be torquing down the final torque on these rods. So removing the clips, pulling the shift linkage off of the rod assemblies. I'm going to make sure I don't lose this bushing. Pushing it to the side. Do the same with the other shifter cable. Sliding it to the side. And then taking a 13mm socket. Now, while supporting underneath of it, I will torque this to 7 Nm. Perfect. Same with the other one. Reposition and torque to 7 Nm. Perfect. Now that is all tight, we're going to reinstall the cables with the clips like previous. Now that we've completely installed our shifter and our shifter cable brackets, we're going to be putting the battery tray back in, the battery, and installing the intake so we can finish up this DIY. Now, we're going to be installing this battery tray back in the vehicle. One thing to watch out for, there is a plastic spacer behind it right here, and that can fall, so we just want to make sure that's not going to fall off while we're sliding this in and dropping it down. Also, you're going to have to make sure that you clear all your cables and move them over. We're going to take our 3 10mm bolts, thread them into the appropriate holes when we line it up, just like so. This one is a little deeper, so you may need a socket with an extension on it to reach it. I'm going to take this nut here and thread it onto that back position. And before I thread in my final nut on the battery tray, I'm going to have to take this bracket in orientation like this, slide it into this position, and then I can put that bolt through that bracket and thread it in. Now, just going around with my 10mm socket and just hand threading these bolts in so I can come back with my torque wrench and torque them to spec. Now, with all of these bolts threaded in, we're going to take our torque wrench set to 9 Nm and torque all these 4 bolts on this battery tray. Now that I have the battery tray installed, I'm going to take my ground terminal for the battery, tuck it off to the side, and then take the wiring harness that we removed previous and make sure that it is accessible and I can grab it when I have this battery installed. Again, this battery is quite heavy, so be careful when you're lowering this in. I'm gonna grab both my handles here, slide the back of the battery in first, push it all the way back. I may need to reposition this ground terminal here, push it all the way back, and then we're gonna grab the tie down. With the battery tie down, we're gonna slide it forward. Might have to shimmy it a little bit. Install it like so. Take our 13mm bolt, thread it all the way in, and then grab our torque wrench to torque this to spec. With our torque wrench and our 13mm socket, we're going to torque the battery hold down bolt to 20 Nm. Now with the first battery hold down tightened to spec, we're going to install our positive battery cable first and then the ground. So we're going to take the positive battery cable, push all the grommets for the wire holders back in place like so, install this, snug that up, and then torque this nut to 5 Nm. Once we have the positive battery terminal tightened to spec, we're going to take the ground and do the same and torque that to 5 Nm. Be careful, we have live battery now, so we don't want to touch any metal bits, including the hood, the ECM, or anything around here, because if we do, it may short it. Now that we have both of our battery terminals torqued to spec, we're going to take this strap that we took off earlier, fish it through, lay it on top of this, fit the hole in here, grab our nut, and then torque this nut to 9 Newton meters. Now that's torqued to 9 Newton meters, we're going to take this harness that we had earlier, plug in this connector, make sure that lock is engaged, and then take this harness, thread on the nut, and torque that to 5 Newton meters. With the battery installed, one of our last things we have to do is reinstall all of our intake components. We're going to remove this blue towel that I put in our intake previous to protect it. Take the plastic diverter valve hose with some glass cleaner sprayed in there, clip it back in place like so. Make sure we have that click. Take this intake pipe, lower it gently, and push it on to the turbo inlet. Now, there will be an alignment mark that we'll have to line up here on the plastic intake and the turbo inlet so that it is aligned correctly. With this plastic intake pipe now installed onto the turbo inlet, we're going to take our screwdriver here and tighten the clamp. Be sure not to over tighten this. With the intake in my hand, we're going to take some glass cleaner, spray it in all the rubber grommets, and then we will spray inside of this intake boot real quick. Be careful of this little hose here. It has a position that it needs to go downwards. We're going to lift this intake pipe while we push down on the airbox to make sure all of that is pressed down securely. I'm going to counter hold the airbox and install the intake pipe onto the airbox. And again, we're looking at this mark here, making sure those are both lining up. Now, some of you may ask why we're using glass cleaner. It's because glass cleaner will not affect any of these plastics and is safe and can be used as a lubricant. So once we have our hose clamp pliers on here, we're going to stretch this, slide it over, and release it centered to that line. A little bit of glass cleaner on this vacuum line, and then we can slide that right onto our intake nipple. All right, we just finished up installing our short shifter upgrade kit, so let's go enjoy the fruit of our labors and take it for a test drive. So we're back in this car, and folks, I have to tell you, this is an awesome upgrade on this Mk8 Golf R. All the shifts are super crisp, the throw is reduced greatly, and it's much easier to downshift and just row through the gears, and I can feel that positive engagement, unlike before, where when I was shifting into that gear, since we had those rubber shifter end links, it was a little soft. And this is a car that I feel like we're buying it because we want the most aggressive kind of race car feel out of the Mk8 Golf. And this shifter upgrade is definitely making it feel very special. So one thing I do have to mention after you've done the complete installation and put the battery back together, when you first start the car and drive it, you're gonna see some lights on the dash. Now, a drive cycle will make all those lights go away. We're just going to have to reset our clock and make sure all of the one touch and everything is reset on the windows because we removed the battery. All right, let's see how this car can drive. The shifter still feels super smooth, and there's not that numb feeling that I was used to when I used to shift the gears. The side-by-side movement has been greatly reduced. The throw forward and back is not even the same shifter. And this is something that I would recommend to every Mk8 Golf R and GTI owner that wants a more direct shifting experience when driving their car. All right, so that wraps up today's DIY video. If you've liked what you've seen in this video, it would help us out if you hit that like button. If you have any comment or questions about what we've covered in this video, be sure to drop it in the comment section below. And we have a ton more of DIY videos coming for the Mk8 Golf R and GTI chassis, including some really cool upgrades that we have planned for this car. So if you want to get up to date, be sure to hit that subscribe button. My name's Cole from FCP Euro, and I'm gonna go roast some gears. Oh yeah, that feels good.